Hello, I'm Bakir Aslanov and you are watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. I don't want to have a wasted meeting, says Donald Trump after his plan to hold a summit with Russia's Putin are put on hold. Russia launches a large-scale missile assault on Ukraine, striking multiple cities, including Kiev. And Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan calls Azerbaijan's decision to lift transit restrictions as a major step towards peace. Good afternoon. The planned second summit between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian leader Vladimir Putin has been postponed indefinitely. The White House says there is little prospect for a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine at this stage. The cancellation of the Budapest meeting highlights the growing diplomatic deadlock as the war continues. Our Ubi Shbander has more.
What was intended to be a second summit between President Trump and Russian leader Vladimir Putin is now postponed for the foreseeable future. The meeting was to take place in Budapest, Hungary, but officials say that the White House believes that the prospects for a deal between Russia and Ukraine to end the war remain slim. And there remains a major gap between Russian and Ukrainian demands, with Russia believing that they can still manage a breakthrough on the battlefield. President Trump recently met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky earlier in the week, where he told him that he wants Russia and Ukraine to stop the war at the current front lines. Behind closed doors, the meeting in the White House was described by those in the know as being tense. The Kremlin is insisting that Ukraine withdraw from strategic fortified positions in the eastern Donbass region. And a phone call between Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov also took place earlier in the week, but yielded no agreement in a meeting or towards a summit between Putin and Trump. Mark Rutte, the head of the NATO military alliance, will be meeting Trump this week to discuss European support for Ukraine and joint efforts to end the war. Trump told reporters on Tuesday that he does not want to have a, quote, wasted meeting with Putin in Budapest, given the current impasse. Trump called the conflict a vicious war and told the media that he still believes that there's a chance for a ceasefire in Ukraine. I'm Ube Shabander, A News, Washington.
Russia carried out a large-scale overnight missile assault on Ukraine early Wednesday, targeting energy infrastructure and killing 2 people in Kiev, Ukrainian officials said. Debris from intercepted missiles ignited fires across nearly half of Kiev's districts. The attacks also struck Dnipro, Zaporizhia, and the southern part of the Izmail, marking one of the heaviest barrages in weeks. The assault came shortly after Ukraine reportedly hit Russia's Bryansk chemical plant with a Storm Shadow missile, a facility believed to produce components for Russian weaponry. The escalation coincided with the cancellation of a planned U.S.-Russia summit. Now, China is stepping up oil imports from Russia, defying Western pressure to curb those energy ties. New data shows trade between the two countries remains strong, underscoring the limits of sanctions as Asian demand keeps providing Moscow with a vital financial lifeline.
China's crude oil imports from Russia rose 4.3% in September from August to 8.29 million tons, accounting for 17.5% of China's total crude imports, according to customs data. The rise comes despite ongoing U.S. pressure on countries to curb Russian energy purchases, showing the limits of Western sanctions in reshaping global oil flows. Since 2022, Russia-Ukraine war, the U.S. and its allies have imposed sanctions and a G7-led price cap to cut Moscow's oil revenue while avoiding global supply shocks. Western markets have largely abandoned Russian crude, but Asian buyers, especially China and India, have stepped in, drawn by steep discounts and secure supply routes. For China, Russian oil offers cost savings and logistical convenience with shorter shipping distances from Russia's Far East ports. Washington has been urging major importers to limit purchases or comply with the price cap, arguing that reducing Russian energy income is key to weakening its military efforts. The U.S. has also sanctioned shipping and trading firms accused of breaching the cap. However, enforcement remains difficult, as Russia increasingly relies on non Western shipping networks. Despite sanctions, steady demand from Asia provides Moscow with an important financial lifeline, revealing the enduring challenges of isolating Russia's energy sector. Hanum A News, Beijing.
U.S. President Donald Trump is set to visit Japan later this month, his first trip there since returning to office. Chief Cabinet Secretary Minoru Chiara confirmed Trump will visit from October 27th to 29th, meeting Emperor Naruhito and newly elected Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. He added that Japan views the visit as a chance to strengthen the U.S.-Japan alliance and advance cooperation in a free and open Indo-Pacific. Trump last visited Japan in 2019 as a guest of then Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. North Korea fired several short-range ballistic missiles just a week before world leaders are set to gather in South Korea for the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff reported the missiles were launched from an area near Pyongyang in a northeasterly direction. It marks North Korea's first ballistic missile test since May. Peru's interim president José Herri has declared a 30-day state of emergency in the capital Lima and the neighboring province of Callao to combat surging crime. The measure authorizes the deployment of the armed forces alongside police to maintain public order. Addressing the nation, Peru's president pledged to restore peace, tranquility, and trust. The decision follows a nationwide protest last week that left one person dead and more than 100 injured. Herri, who took office earlier this month after the ousting of former President Dina Boluarte, has made tackling crime his administration's top priority. Israel has received two bodies that Hamas says are two more deceased hostages who had been held in Gaza. The Israeli military said two coffins were handed over to troops in the Palestinian territory by the Red Cross, which had earlier received them from Hamas. The coffins will be formally identified in Tel Aviv. Confirmation of their identities would mean that Hamas has transferred 15 out of 28 deceased Israeli hostages under the first phase of a U.S.-brokered ceasefire deal earlier this month. All 20 living hostages were released shortly after the agreement was reached. Meanwhile, the peace plan is durable and will last, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance said during his visit to Israel, where American troops had been deployed to monitor the Gaza ceasefire. He repeated President Donald Trump's claims that if Hamas doesn't cooperate, it will be obliterated. Saying the international security force hasn't yet been set up, Vance added that the priorities now are ensuring that both the Palestinians living in Gaza and the Israelis are able to live in some measure of security, and that Gaza is rebuilt. He called for patience when it comes to the return of the deceased hostages, saying some of them are under thousands of pounds of rubble.
This peace deal was struck under the president's leadership literally a week ago. The hostages were returned, 6 days ago, 5 days ago? So we're in the phase now where we're actually starting to conceptualize what that international security force would look like. I think it's important for Americans to know a couple of things. Number one, there are not going to be American boots on the ground in Gaza. The President of the United States has made that very clear. All of our military leadership has made that very clear. What we can do is provide some useful coordination. How do you take, the Gulf Arab states, plus Israel, plus plus the Turks, plus the Indonesians, how do you actually get those folks to work together in a way that actually produces long-term peace? The only real mediators are the United States of America.
French President Emmanuel Macron said a referendum to settle France's controversial pension reform debate remains a possibility. Speaking in Ljubljana, Macron said he supported his Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu's decision to pause plans to raise the minimum retirement age, but reiterated his belief that the move will eventually be necessary. The reform that was rammed through the parliament without a vote in 2023 has been suspended by Lecornu. The Prime Minister's move came in an effort to win over support from the Socialist Party and survived no confidence votes.
The debate will have to be reopened, and I am pleased that the Prime Minister wished to reopen this debate at the same time, and that several union and employer groups have expressed their desire to resume it. And this must be done in a peaceful manner because the issue of ageing will not be resolved by a compromise necessary to pass the budget. On this issue, the prospect of a referendum is possible. We still need to know what it will be about.
Welcome back to A News. Vice President J.D. Vance is in Israel this week as Washington pushes to stabilize the fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. The truce brokered earlier this month and based partly on President Donald Trump's peace framework has faced repeated tests and amid renewed violence and mutual distrust. While J.D. Vance expressed optimism that the deal could hold, the issue of Hamas's disarmament remains a central obstacle to achieving lasting peace. Israel insists the group must disarm before the Gaza war can truly end, while Palestinians on the ground report that little has changed with ongoing strikes, limited aid and mounting frustration. To help us unpack these developments, we are joined by Nuno Martins, a geopolitologist and consultant on EU affairs. Nuno, welcome to the program.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me.
No, let's start with J.D. Vance's visit. How significant is this trip in the context of ongoing U.S. efforts to stabilize the Israel-Hamas ceasefire?
Well, first and foremost, it's always significant to have the Vice President visiting a country and visiting Israel, and especially visiting so soon after the ceasefire agreement that was held 2 weeks ago. This is the first thing. The second thing, why it's important because it's basically discussing about the implementation of the ceasefire. We all know that the ceasefire was built on 20 plans, and those 20 plans were basically consequences, even though some of them could be independent, of one to the other. There is a willing on certain countries to say, and some also commentators, to say that everything was very fragile, everything was very weak. But the problem is that, and I think this is why Vice President Vance went to Israel, everybody knows that. And everybody knows that the implementation of the ceasefire agreement goes step by step. So now the second point of the implementation, which is, in my view, the most important, or at least the first more important, is the demilitarization of Hamas. And the idea that the US has to create and to monitor and to coordinate in south of Israel this center with other armies to implement and to start arranging an international force in Gaza is, in my view, very important. And this is the real reason why Vice President Vance went to Israel.
Nuno, Vice President J.D. Vance avoided setting a deadline for Hamas's disarmament. How might this ambiguity affect Israel's trust in the deal?
I don't think it's an ambiguity. The deal was agreed by both parties. This point was an essential point, as I said before, and Hamas agreed on that, and now Hamas is not trying to agree on that. And the question is, despite the fact that the Trump administration allowed Hamas to get some guns to at least control the territory immediately after the ceasefire agreement, the question is that doesn't mean that it was a green card for Hamas to do whatever they wanted to keep power in place. I do believe that now it's the time for Hamas to decide if they want to go into become really a political organization, accepting the existence of Israel, or if they want to go outwards, basically.
So from your perspective, is full disarmament of Hamas a realistic condition, or is it more of a political demand?
When you say realistic, it means it's not going to be easy to do it. I do agree with that. And it's not going to be easy to do it because there will be some strengths and some resistance by the Hamas side. If it is political, it's not going to be sufficient to be political, in my view. I think that there will be some confrontation, and it will depend on first Hamas, and it will depend on the international cooperation, how long and how much Israel is going to accept that in terms of controlling the territory. And thirdly, also about everyone else and all the political actors in Gaza, which is not necessarily the Palestinian Authority.
So how do you assess Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's position that the Gaza war cannot truly end without Hamas giving up its weapons?
The question is this. The 7th of October was a turning point. I said it before, I continue saying that. I don't believe that it's only Prime Minister Netanyahu who says that, it's the whole Israeli society. They are not going to accept the status quo since 2006, which was basically a Cold War with Hamas, where Hamas was sending fires, Israel was attacking, and this is no longer sustainable, because if this will continue, then nobody can guarantee that another 7th of October will not happen in the future. And this is not acceptable by the Israeli society as a whole. And this is why I do believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu is giving these words, in the sense that if Hamas will keep its guns and its military weapons, then the situation will not be sustainable as Israel wanted since the beginning of the war.
This weekend we have seen renewed violence in Gaza despite the truce. So what does that say about the strength and enforcement of this agreement?
Look, I think this is not necessarily a challenge for the agreement, because this is a natural consequence. When the strongest part in the field is weakened, and you have different political controls, you have the reality on the ground, which is not a reality of that we are, let's put it like this, that we are seeing everywhere in the world. It's a reality of of clans, reality of political families, and they are trying to fight within each other to see who gets the power to at least manage the ceasefire agreement and the peace that came into the territory.
And on the ground, Palestinians say little has changed since the ceasefire began. How might these local realities affect the ceasefire's long-term sustainability?
Again, I think, well, first and foremost, we have to say, what does it mean nothing has changed? On one hand. On the other hand, we know that there are some exchanges between the Israeli forces and the Hamas forces. We know that there are still some concerns about the humanitarian aid for different reasons. But I do believe this is just a small narrative, and this is a small managing of the situation in the beginning, and things can be, in my view, going into the right direction. It's difficult to assess exactly what that means, and you can see, and by other reports as well, that somehow, on one hand, it's very difficult to get into normal life because the territory is destroyed. The territory is very small. You have still a very amount of population living in the territory, so it's not easy, despite the conditions. But I think it will be going into what, in my view, will be the development of the ceasefire agreement and the peace plan that was imposed by the Trump administration.
How is J.D. Vance's message likely to be received by the Israeli leadership, especially given the ongoing domestic pressures on Netanyahu's government?
I think that message goes in favor of the government for different reasons. We have to understand that the vice president represents a certain perspective on the Trump electors, which is very much critical of American involvement in foreign wars, in foreign involvement. So the fact that he is here by himself is already very positive, first and foremost. I think it was clear from the press conference he gave that he's there to implement the process of the military coordination in the south of Israel, as I said before. And this is also good for the Israeli government, because the pressure on the Israeli government is basically from the more right-wing parties. But those right-wing parties can also be replaced by the more centrist parties who are very much involved and who very much support this peace agreement. We saw recently the dismissal of Mr. Hanegbi, who was critical of Prime Minister Netanyahu moves in Gaza. But I don't believe that he has a strong voice to be somehow very critical or very, let's say, can change the line regarding the Israeli government. So just to summarize, I do believe that what we are looking here is basically a coordination meeting to see how to implement the next steps. And I also believe that this will continue to be like this for the next months, in sense that somehow a high political American figure will come to Israel to coordinate the implementation of the ceasefire agreement, as I said before.
Now let's turn to the EU's perspective. Given recent tensions within the EU over Middle East policy, can Brussels play a meaningful mediating or humanitarian role here?
Absolutely not. Absolutely, because of many things. First and foremost, you can see right now which member states are giving troops, to put some troops on the ground to start this military coordination center in South Israel. And we have the UK, we have Denmark, we don't have France, who was very much on the front line on this European side to create an agreement without Israel and to try to push for an agreement between the Hamas and Israel, on one hand. On the other hand, the EU position is very weak for two reasons. The first reason, there is a big division within the member states, even though the majority of the member states are for the involvement of Europe in this process. You have some who want to be very harsh on Israel, and you have some who don't want to be harsh at all on Israel, neither to be involved. So this creates a division, and it creates a very strong division, as you can also see in the war in Ukraine and the potential peace in the war in Ukraine as well. So this is another hand. So I think that what we will see individual member states. I think some of the member states will be refused by Israel to be there. If you talk about Ireland, Belgium, Luxembourg, for instance. And I think that at the end of the day, that will be a weakened position of the European Union as a whole.
Martins, thank you very much for joining us and sharing your insights on this critical and evolving situation in Gaza and the broader Middle East. Thanks a lot.
Pleasure was mine. Thank you.
Welcome back to A News. Now let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. The 5th Tbilisi Silk Road Forum is underway in the Georgian capital, bringing together world leaders, policymakers and business figures to discuss one of the most pressing issues of the region: connectivity, cooperation and sustainable growth across Eurasia. Our Nini Nikolaishvili has more from Venue.
Held under the patronage of Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze, the two-day forum opened this morning in Tbilisi. This year's theme, Investing Connectivity, Growing Stability, reflects the forum's growing role as a key international platform linking Asia and Europe. The opening high-level dialogue brought together the prime ministers of Georgia, Armenia and Azerbaijan, a landmark moment given the recent progress in peace efforts between Yerevan and Baku. Both Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan and Azerbaijani Prime Minister Ali Asadov highlighted the importance of turning peace into practical cooperation, with new transport routes, trade corridors and economic ties taking shape across the South Caucasus. Central to the discussions is the Middle Corridor, the Trans-Caspian transport route connecting China and Central Asia to Europe via Azerbaijan, Georgia and Turkey. Leaders emphasized that this route is becoming one of the safest and most efficient links for global trade, especially as peace in the region opens up new pathways for commerce and investment. Azerbaijan's investments in infrastructure, Georgia's expanding port facilities and Armenia's readiness to reopen borders all signal a new chapter of regional collaboration. Officials say that this momentum could transform the South Caucasus into a key hub of the modern Silk Road. Throughout the two-day event, over 2,300 delegates from more than 70 countries are participating in 7 main panels, covering trade, energy, innovation and logistics, as well as focused discussions on strategic projects such as the Anaklia deep sea port and the Black Sea submarine cable. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Staying on the topic, Armenia has announced its readiness to allow truck transit between Turkey and Azerbaijan. The move is seen as significant for restoring trust and boosting economic ties in the region. The project is important not only economically, but also for peace and stability. Pashinyan also called Azerbaijan's decision to lift restrictions on cargo transit to Armenia as a major step towards peace. Here is what Armenian Prime Minister had to say.
Starting today, we are ready to ensure the transit of trucks from Turkey to Azerbaijan and from Azerbaijan to Turkey through Armenia. This major project is not only economic, but also a significant step towards peace and stability. One of its outcomes will be the opening of the peace route connecting Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan. The president of Azerbaijan has taken a very important and positive step. This decision holds great importance for restoring trust and developing economic ties in the region. Peace in the region is of utmost importance. Building connections and expanding cooperation will bring more opportunities, growth and prosperity to the countries of the region. This will further strengthen peace in the South Caucasus.
At the 5th Tbilisi Silk Road Forum, Azerbaijan's Prime Minister Ali Asadov highlighted the historic importance of the agreements reached under the peace agenda between Azerbaijan and Armenia, saying they lay the groundwork for lasting regional cooperation. He noted that the new transport route will boost international cargo transit and strengthen the Middle Corridor, underscoring Azerbaijan's commitment to rebuilding trust and connectivity across the region.
Significant steps are being taken towards the establishment of a unified tariff policy in close cooperation with international partners, the simplification of customs and border procedures, and the promotion of multimodal transport. In support of this, earlier this month, the railway operators of Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Kazakhstan reached an agreement on the application of a single long-term tariff for shipments along the Middle Corridor. The parties also agreed to take joint measures to improve port, railway, and logistics infrastructure, eliminate existing bottlenecks, expand digitalization, and enhance the throughput capacity of the corridor. We are confident that our joint efforts will fully realize the transport and logistics potential of the region, increase trade turnover and investment flows, and strengthen economic ties across the Eurasian space.
Just bringing you the latest on the December 2024 aviation tragedy involving an Azerbaijan Airlines aircraft. Kazakhstan Deputy Prime Minister Kanat Bozumbayev, who leads the state commission investigating the crash near Aktau, says the findings may be released after the new year. It follows an October meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev, where Putin called the crash a tragedy caused by multiple factors, including Ukrainian drones in Russian airspace and a malfunction in Russia's air defense system. Armenia and Turkey will soon hold an interagency meeting to discuss the restoration and reopening of the Gümrük-Kars Railway, according to Armenia's special representative for normalization with Turkey, Ruben Rubinyan. In September, Rubinyan met with his Turkish counterpart Serdar Kılıç in Yerevan to discuss bilateral issues. After the talks, officials said both sides agreed to start technical studies on restoring the railway and the electricity interconnector. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is on a 3-day Gulf tour aiming to strengthen Turkey's ties with key regional partners. The tour started in Kuwait, continued in Qatar, and will conclude in Oman. Let's take a look.
President Recep Tayyip Erdogan arrived in Doha for an official visit at the invitation of Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. In Doha, President Erdogan was welcomed with a formal ceremony at Hamad International Airport by Qatar's Deputy Prime Minister and Defense Minister Sheikh Saud bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, along with other senior officials and Turkey's Ambassador Mustafa Göksu. This marks the second stop on his 3-day Gulf tour, which began in Kuwait and will conclude in Oman. Earlier in Kuwait, 4 key agreements were signed, which were aimed at enhancing cooperation in energy, maritime transport, investment incentives and mutual recognition of seafarers' certificates. Looking ahead, President Erdogan is scheduled to visit Oman to further deepen strategic, economic and cultural ties between Turkey and Arab states. This Gulf tour reflects Turkey's ongoing efforts to bolster political, economic and strategic partnerships across the region.
The presidents of Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan have met in Astana, signing a series of new cooperation agreements. Talks in Astana focused on expanding energy, transport and digital cooperation as the countries marked 20 years of strategic partnership.
In Astana, President of Azerbaijan Ilham Aliyev and President of Kazakhstan Kassym-Jomart Tokayev have been holding talks to strengthen their countries' allied partnership. The visit coincides with the 20th anniversary of the Treaty on Strategic Partnership and Allied Relations between Baku and Astana. The two leaders discussed expanding cooperation in trade, energy and transport. A key highlight was the presentation of the Middle Corridor Development Project, the Trans-Caspian route connecting China, Central Asia and Europe. Officials said freight shipments from China to Azerbaijan are expected to triple by 2030, underscoring the project's growing importance. At the second meeting of the Azerbaijan-Kazakhstan Supreme Interstate Council, the presidents reaffirmed their commitment to political, economic and cultural cooperation.
It is quite symbolic that your visit is taking place in the year marking the 20th anniversary of the Treaty on Strategic Partnership and Allied Relations between our countries. Over these years, we have established an active political dialogue and created a solid legal framework for the continued development of trade, economic, cultural and humanitarian cooperation. Such comprehensive and consistent work is fully supported by the citizens of our countries.
Talks also covered post-conflict developments in the South Caucasus, regional transport links including the Zangezur corridor and new investment initiatives.
The opening of the Zangezur corridor will significantly increase transport and logistics capacity in the coming years. The Intergovernmental Commission recently held a meeting, and it was also very positive. Significant results have been achieved in strengthening trade and economic ties. Our trade turnover is growing, and we are very pleased with that, of course. The joint investment fund we established also has tremendous potential.
A series of agreements were signed and exchanged between the two sides, covering energy partnership, industrial property protection, healthcare, statistics and law enforcement. Memorandums were also signed on artificial intelligence, digital services and the creation of a joint investment mechanism involving SOCAR, Azerbaijan Investment Holding and Kazakhstan's Samruk Kazinov. The two leaders adopted a joint statement marking 2 decades of strategic partnership and outlining further steps to deepen bilateral cooperation.
During the diplomatic events in Astana, our Orkan Amashov spoke on Kazakhstan's approach to artificial intelligence with Daniyar Meirbekov from the country's Ministry of Digital Development, Innovation and Aerospace Industry. Let's have a listen.
Many nation states, European countries, are talking about digital sovereignty. They say you should be sovereign in all meanings of this word, also in the digital sense. To what extent the increase in the utilization of AI technologies serve that purpose?
Yes, I totally agree that the digital sovereignty is substantial, especially in the era of AI, because when we use, let's say, large language models that are such as ChatGPT or any other. So obviously these any prompts that you input, it's already public. Any information you input there is already public. So in my opinion, throughout time, that's going to be also the part of the ethical aspect of using AI. That is why, in our opinion, that having your at least the solution would be to develop your, at a certain level, some large language models that can be used locally and that can be stored locally in order to implement certain type of tasks that to kind of maintain the data privacy. Yeah, so in my opinion, that is a really important aspect to consider when using AI and implementing it in the spheres of our industries, economy, etc.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to you for your detailed answers. So grateful. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
A group of world travelers has arrived in Agdam today to begin a rare two-day journey across Karabakh, exploring how the region is rebuilding and reopening to the world. Our Gulcin Kojalieva has more.
Here in Agdam, some of the world's most seasoned travelers are gathering to embark on a remarkable two-day journey across Karabakh. The delegation, organized by Extreme Travelers International, includes adventurers from 8 countries, including Charles Welly, founder of the global Most Traveled People Network. Over the course of this journey, the team will travel from Agdam to Khankendi, Laçın, Shusha, and finally Fuzuli, passing through landscapes that tell stories of both destruction and renewal. In Khankendi, they will take part in the ETIC Professorial Exchange Forum at Karabakh University, joining local scholars to discuss culture, travel, and rebuilding connections in a region emerging from conflict. This marks the 15th such visit since 2021, reflecting growing global interest in Karabakh's reconstruction, where new cities and villages are rising and families are returning home. It's Gulcin Kojalieva with Natik Mamedov for A News.
Istanbul is hosting one of the most significant international gatherings focused on protecting our planet's green lungs. The Istanbul Forest Innovation Week is bringing together scientists, forestry experts and industry leaders from across the globe to discuss the future of forests in the face of climate change. Throughout the 5-day event, participants from 75 countries, 30 international organizations and over 400 experts are engaging in discussions on advanced firefighting technologies, forest fire management and raising awareness about climate-related risks. As rising global temperatures and prolonged droughts increase the frequency and intensity of wildfires, experts at the Istanbul Forum emphasize the urgent need for innovation and international cooperation. Welcome back to A News. A major development is reshaping the South Caucasus transport and political landscape. Azerbaijan has officially lifted restrictions on the transit of goods to Armenia through its territory, a move President Ilham Aliyev described as marking a new era of peace between the two countries. The first shipment of Kazakh wheat bound for Armenia will soon travel through Azerbaijan and Georgia, signaling tangible progress toward reopening regional transport links. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan welcomed Baku's decision, calling it a major step toward peace. Speaking at the 5th Tbilisi Silk Road Forum, Pashinyan emphasized that regional cooperation platforms like these are vital for deepening ties and fostering stability. He also announced that Armenia is ready to allow the transit of Turkish and Azerbaijani trucks through its territory, a landmark gesture that could redefine regional connectivity. Meanwhile, preparations are underway for an interagency meeting between Armenia and Turkey to discuss the reopening of the Gümrük-Kars Railway, another potential milestone in regional normalization. To discuss these latest developments, I'm joined by former U.S. Ambassador Matthew Bryce. Mr. Bryce, welcome to the program and thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Bakhtiar. It's a pleasure to be with you as always.
Mr. Bryce, President Ilham Aliyev called this development a new era of peace. How significant is Azerbaijan's decision to lift transit restrictions for the broader peace process in the South Caucasus?
It's hugely significant, Bakhtiar. I mean, there are just a couple of issues that were blocking implementation of the pledges made with President Trump back in August. And one key issue was to realize the Zangezur corridor. Azerbaijan and Armenia needed to agree on who would handle customs and what kind of checks would there be on goods flowing from Azerbaijan into and across Armenia and in the other direction. And with that big gesture in Tbilisi by President Aliyev yesterday, he made what was a great and grand gesture that unlocked the cooperation and now was reciprocated by Prime Minister Pashinyan, who says, okay, then we're going to agree in response, as a sign of good faith, to let goods flow from Azerbaijan across Armenia to Nakhchivan and onward to Turkey, and vice versa. So this answers one of the biggest questions about whether, how, and when these pledges on the Zangezur corridor would be realized. It's a very, very important and positive moment.
Mr. Bryce, the first Kazakh wheat shipment will travel through Azerbaijan and Georgia to Armenia. How symbolic is this particular route in demonstrating regional cooperation?
It's a great choice in terms of symbolism because grain is, it's a food that sustains life. Kazakhstan produces a lot of it. Kazakhstan looks for export routes, being a landlocked country, doesn't want to rely so much on the Russian market. And so this is a sign that Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan, which have been building their cooperation for the last couple of years and really accelerating it, specifically on logistics in the Middle Corridor, now are going to make sure that that Middle Corridor can also benefit Armenia, which suggests Azerbaijan and Armenia are really entering into a new period of peace and cooperation that will strengthen peace by fostering economic growth.
So could this transit opening serve as a confidence-building measure leading to a comprehensive peace treaty between Azerbaijan and Armenia?
Oh, most definitely. That's a better way to put it than all the stuff I've been saying. This is the most significant confidence-building measure I've seen in quite some time in terms of not words only, but concrete measures. And, the big challenge to finalize and sign the comprehensive peace treaty is that Azerbaijan is demanding an amendment of the Armenian constitution, understandably, to make sure the constitution of Armenia does not even suggest possible designs on Azerbaijan's territory. But that politically requires a big change of mood in Armenia because a lot of people don't want to agree to that change in the constitution. I mean, in Armenia, it would have to be approved by a national referendum, not to mention a supermajority in parliament. And I think goodwill gestures like the ones we're discussing that are even more than goodwill gestures, but will have a real tangible positive impact on the economic life of people in Armenia will help to change that national mood in Armenia and therefore make it possible to get that constitutional amendment that's required for the peace treaty.
So Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan described Azerbaijan's step as a major step toward peace. What does this tell us about Armenia's current diplomatic approach to its neighbors?
Yeah, it basically says that I think the Prime Minister agrees with what I've been saying, that by normalizing relations now with Azerbaijan and Turkey, with finding peace with Azerbaijan and using transportation connectivity as a way to generate good faith, Pashinyan sees that as let's say this way, one of the pathways or roadways to peace. And, his proposal to do what I just said is a little bit broader than Azerbaijan's. Prime Minister Pashinyan, as your package was reporting, has talked about so-called crossroads for peace. So multiple directions of transportation links between Armenia and its neighbors. And that's probably a very healthy development. I mean, the news also came out today that Armenia and Turkey are talking about now maybe resurrecting the idea of a Kars-Gyumri railway. That's a project I first started hearing about in 1997, even longer than I know you. So that's like 28 years ago. And that has always seemed like sort of a dream that was so politically difficult to accomplish that it was more of a phantom. But now, even that may be a possibility.
Mr. Bryce, the upcoming interagency meeting between Armenia and Turkey aims to discuss reopening the Gyumri-Kars railway. How important could this connection be for both economies?
Yeah, that's what I was just talking about. So that connection, Kars-Gyumri or Gyumri-Kars, is a way to incorporate Armenia into the Middle Corridor, which until now has bypassed Armenia, right? I mean, the main route for the Middle Corridor has been across the Caspian Sea into Azerbaijan and then Georgia, and then to the Black Sea and into Turkey, bypassing Armenia. Kars-Gyumri would allow Armenia to be incorporated into the Middle Corridor. And then if you add on to it the expansion of the Middle Corridor through the Zangezur corridor we've been discussing, which is part of the Middle Corridor as well, that brings Armenia into all sorts of forms of regional economic cooperation that will stimulate economic growth for Armenia.
So what do you think? How could regional and external actors such as Russia, the EU and China view and respond to these developments in transport connectivity?
Well, China is very is supportive because such connectivity really is helping China reach Europe and vice versa. Russia has been careful and has not criticized these agreements. I don't think Russia is in favor of them, though, at all, especially if you go back to the agreements of August, I guess, 8th or 9th in Washington, and you look at the joint strategic partnership agreements between the U.S. and Azerbaijan and the U.S. and Armenia. One of the issues on the agenda that's cited is border security cooperation. I'm sure Russia is very much not in favor of that sort of cooperation with the United States, especially since Russia's border guards until now have guarded Armenia's border with Turkey. That gives Russia and the FSB a physical presence in Armenia. Originally in the November 10, 2020 ceasefire statement, there was a call for Russia's FSB troops to control the Zangezur corridor. Now that no longer seems to be the case. So Russia is not in favor of this happening. Iran wants to make sure that when these projects go forward, it won't be somehow isolated or won't lose its connectivity with Armenia. And I think that can be worked out.
Mr. Bryce, what role is Georgia playing in facilitating this new phase of regional cooperation, particularly as part of the transit corridor?
Number one, Prime Minister Kouakize hosted the summit meeting at which Armenia and Azerbaijan were able to make these very positive and reinforcing mutual gestures of goodwill. I think Georgia can do more in the future simply by cooperating on another element that was in your package before our interview began, which is Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan's leaders agreeing to increase the efficiency of the existing transportation links, so across the Caspian through Azerbaijan and Georgia onward to Turkey. Because the more transit that goes through that existing part of the middle corridor, the more interest there will be by goods shippers and producers and buyers of goods to use the entire South Caucasus corridor, including the new elements that will become the Zangezur corridor. So more demand and more supply of logistics capabilities through Georgia will lead to more demand via Azerbaijan and Armenia and Turkey, because the South Caucasus will be seen in general as a reliable and stable place in which to invest and do business transactions.
Mr. Bryce, let's return back to Russia again. Armenia relies heavily on Russian grains. 89% of it comes from Russia. To what extent will this affect their reliance on Russia?
Well, historically, for centuries, Armenia has been highly reliant on Russia, right? For all the security reasons we all know. And under Prime Minister Pashinyan, Armenia's government has been trying to reduce its reliance on Russia. It's very unhappy with the Collective Security Treaty Organization. It wants to connect more with the European Union and less with the Eurasian Economic Union. Yes, dependence on Russian grain is important for Armenia, so is dependence on Russian energy. But again, under the leadership of Prime Minister Pashinyan, Armenia is trying to reduce that dependence. And as you and I have already been talking about, Bakhtiar, President Aliyev's freeing up of transit of grain from Kazakhstan to Armenia is an important part in reducing Armenia's dependence on Russia.
Mr. Bryce, finally, what challenges could still derail this emerging spirit of cooperation, and what steps will be necessary to ensure that this new era of peace endures?
I think there are two primary ones. One is I don't think, as I said before, Russia wants to see these agreements move forward. In my time as the U.S. mediator, the co-chair of the Minsk group, I always was impressed by how collaborative my counterpart was, Ambassador Yuri Merzlikov, as well as Foreign Minister Lavrov, even then President Medvedev. But I always also thought the Russians were going to be supportive up to the point of there being a framework agreement for a future peace treaty, but would not want the conflict settled once and for all via a peace treaty signed by Armenia and Azerbaijan, because that would reduce Russia's ability to let's say, intervene or meddle in Azerbaijan and Armenia. I think that's still the case now. So I would not be surprised if we saw some sort of Russian attempts to affect or manipulate Armenia's parliamentary election next spring. because that election is crucial to doing what I talked about before, getting a majority of members of the Armenian parliament who will approve of an amendment to the Armenian constitution that will enable the final peace treaty between the two countries, meaning Azerbaijan and Armenia, to be signed.
Mr. Breither, thank you very much for talking to A News. We greatly appreciate your time and expertise. Thanks a lot.
My honor. Thank you.
We are up to date with world news for an hour. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News.